You to our CRA special board meeting this May the 4th, 2023. I'll call this meeting to order, and we'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. Could we all please stand together? Mr. Urban?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Chairman Blackwell.
Here.
Member Matheny. Here. Member Gilbert.
Here.
Member Fletcher.
Here.
Member Wagner.
Here.
Member Loading.
Here.
Vice Chairman Urban.
Here.
Well, our first item of the afternoon is a downtown P3 site, mixed-use parking garage.
Good afternoon/evening. Antoinette Forbes, Economic Development Director. We are here to discuss what we're now calling the Downtown P3 site, which is the public-private partnership that includes a parking garage, which we've been discussing for some time now. As you recall, it's included in our 5-year strategic financing and implementation plan. At the last meeting, the board had requested the opportunity to provide commentary on the proposed RFP. We do have our consultant here from RMA, Kim Briesmeister, to kind of give you a very short history, since we do have a new board member, of how we came to be. And then at that point, we will be more than happy to receive any direction and comments that you may have on the site.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. This is an exciting time. We obviously spoke about some of the redevelopment opportunities you had.
Please state your name for the record, please.
I'm sorry, Kim Briesmeister, principal with RMA.
Thank you.
We spoke a while ago about all of the opportunities you have in your downtown, but maybe more so, we really, as a consulting firm, try to help our clients hone in on the economic impact. It's all about, if the private sector comes in and invests in your city, what is that economic impact to your tax base? What is the spin-off economic impacts, and how do you continue to grow that? The stronger economically you are as a city, the better services you can provide, et cetera. So it's exciting to see that you're moving forward with what will be a public-private partnership that draws that private investment into your city. And also, I have to say, driving in, I drove up from Fort Lauderdale today. Driving in, it's really refreshing to see not only the kind of development that's coming in and the new residential projects you're getting, but obviously the more kind of investment like that comes on the perimeter of your city, in terms of rooftops, we call them, residential, the more that impacts and opens opportunity for new retail, additional businesses, et cetera. So I think the future of this public-private partnership is going to be influenced by the amount of development that's already taking place in your area. So just a quick recap. We talked before about your city-owned parcels. Obviously, you have a very strong tool by owning land and being able to invest in them and decide what to do with them. And because of the amount of assemblage, we looked at the best way to utilize those parcels for future growth. So the parcel that's highlighted in yellow, which is obviously vacant right now, makes up one of those parcels. We also looked at the surrounding area and how to not only create individual development sites, more important, how do they connect together? The second parcel, and we call this parcel 1, is obviously the one west of City Hall. Then we also looked at another parcel. Now, this is jointly owned city CRA. Obviously, your largest assemblage, but where you have a need for parking, this one was targeted as not only a parcel that could obviously accommodate structured parking, but it starts to form, you start to see a linear grid form where people can not only walk, but start to have activity that is continuous from one block to the next. That's very, very important. Parcel 3 is the one directly east of City Hall. It's currently a surface parking lot. And I have to say one of my favorite parcels is Centennial Plaza. We don't have the image, but I showed it to you last year. It was a town called Healdsburg in California. And it's almost, if you were to do an overlay of their downtown grid, very small, quaint downtown. Healdsburg created a central urban park/plaza area, and the real estate surrounding that plaza just exponentially went up in value as they put in a parking structure, they brought in new retailers, and then next thing you know, the residential started to grow as well. So you've got the opportunity here, and the first step we suggested is go ahead and focus on that public-private partnership of you as the city leading that way of getting enough parking to satisfy some additional public overflow, but more so get that private investment. So this was our recommended next steps quite a while ago. We did suggest that you look at all these parcels together, even though you might not necessarily implement them all at the same time. Another thing I suggested over a year ago is, as the leaders of the community, if you set a vision and you stick to the vision, the private sector will respond very well to that. And if you take these parcels as a whole and start working on them one at a time, as long as you are sticking to that vision, ultimately the private sector will respond quicker. Another thing, just a very important message for the public. Sometimes it's very easy to criticize why a city or a government will spend money, especially on something that might appear to be superfluous. It is an investment. It might be extravagant. But I showed this to a city recently when the city of Palmetto Beach was deciding to build a public parking garage. And one of the commissioners was getting, a lot of questions about, well, why wouldn't we just go for the lower bid, and why can't we just build a garage? Well, the garage on the left, it's a utilitarian garage. It functions well, works great, happens to be at a university, but it's unattractive. There's nothing about it that draws you to it. And the parking garage on the right was the one that the city chose to build. So for the amount of additional investment they made in making a public asset very special, I can tell you that the private development that came around it and the investments in the new restaurants and the residential more than paid for the investment they made. So as you go through this process, what we would try to help you work through is making those decisions of how to invest the money, but make sure you're going to get a return on your investment. The public doesn't want to use taxpayer dollars that's wasted, obviously, but you also don't want to do something that doesn't have the kind of impact that you want it to have. So just quickly, the parcel that we're talking about today, and really the subject of your public-private partnership, is all about attracting private sector. You have just under 2 acres. It's solid enough for you to be able to put structured parking, but it's not a lot of room. You have turn radius issues because garages still need to function. So it's not like we can demand a whole lot of additional public parking, but there's also parking ratios, which I won't get into tonight. I spent a 3-hour meeting today talking about this same subject. Parking ratios for these kind of developments go very far. In other words, if there's people living in this building, they're not going to be in that building all the time. They're going to leave and go to work. That opens up the space for somebody that might be coming into one of the retail bays. So the parking ratios that we'll be looking for in a public-private partnership incorporate what we call shared parking options and opportunities. So the site would be used for public parking. It would be used for mixed use, meaning the ground floor has one use and the upper floors have another use. In this case, you are most likely to get residential developers that want to build above because, number one, that's what the market is right now. And number two, the office market, even though it is a little challenging to finance office markets right now, it usually will follow after you have enough residential cluster because there has to be enough people working in an area or living in an area to be able to work in an area. We have helped your staff draft this request for proposal. Again, I compliment and give kudos to your entire city and CRA staff. They work very well together. There was one meeting where there was almost every department was represented, which is important because they're weighing in on this proposal from the beginning. So they, I think, collectively have given a lot of very technical and professional input into this document, and that just makes it better. Your document is as good as the drafting of it, but obviously you want to get a good response. So quickly, just to summarize, we obviously don't want to get in too much detail about the RFP because it's going to be a public bid. and you don't want to talk about that public bid before it's out there in enough detail that might give somebody an advantage. But I am more than happy, again, to share with you just generalized concepts of things that matter in these kind of bids. So you own the land. You're looking for a proposal that obviously maximizes the value of that land. We're going to look to a developer that has the professional and technical expertise to construct this kind of mixed-use parking. You want dedicated public parking spaces, but you do want to be able to incorporate, like I said, that shared parking options, because not all parking spaces, you don't want them sitting empty. Commercial space on the ground floor is very important. You want pedestrians, and this is a very walkable downtown. You want them to be able to go from one location to the other, so we'll be looking for that active spaces. And let me take one quick sidebar here. Even in downtown Fort Lauderdale 20 years ago, when we negotiated a public-private partnership, there was just not enough density to support the amount of retail that he had linear footage of. We enabled them to put their gym, and they had an exercise room as part of an amenity to that mixed-use residential project. They put that on the ground floor. So even though it wasn't for the public and it wasn't a retail store, it activated the street, because then as people walked by, they could look in, they could see people exercising, working out, et cetera. So I just want to reinforce that we're going to be paying attention to the nuances of how this public-private partnership interacts with the street. And then you do have some land use and zoning. I won't get into that tonight for the sake of time, but you have some land use and zoning recommendations that you're going to need to do to accommodate this kind of development. We are looking, obviously, for something that's architecturally important. I just showed you the garage as an example. But I think that you get to be the arbiter of what that means and what that ultimately looks like when you start to get proposals in. You're looking for that combination of uses, the commercial space. I always will pay attention and pound home that economic impact and make sure that we're making a good business deal. I know governments are not in the private sector, but you do have taxpayer dollars that you're trying to maximize. So we'll be looking at the business side of what's proposed as well. We want the public parking garage. We're looking for the highest and best use, aesthetic massing. Obviously, you've got a historic area here that you want to be respective of heights and density, et cetera. And again, the bottom bullet is we're looking for something that's financially feasible. We are very, very adept at analyzing these kind of proposals, and we'll be looking for them to respond with a formal bid, but we'll also have the opportunity to negotiate and recognize that not every nuance has to go into this proposal for us to go back to them a little bit later and work through details. Some of that might have to do with the things that happen inside the public parking garage, what it looks like, how the floors are leveled, layered, themed, just the concepts that happen inside, the equipment that we use for the public parking garage. We have plenty of time to talk through all of that. You don't necessarily have to bake it all into your proposal, but we do have to let them know that we want to have public parking spaces and that we're going to be entering into negotiations. So that kind of input, if you give it to us, as far as what you think is important, we'll make sure to incorporate the things that need to be in the document, but also leave you the flexibility to negotiate as you get your proposals in. This is your process. You will go through, after you get your bids in, a selection process. You will have a selection committee. Cities do this in various ways. They can have all internal and city department directors. They can have a combination if you have outside folks be on it. Generally, there is a technical team. We generally fit in that capacity, and we will be either advisors or we'll be part of your technical team. We don't vote. We're not part of the selection. We'll advise on things that we see matter that will make a technical difference in terms of the proposal's review. The proposal will be scored, and then an ordinal ranking is, it levels out a playing field just in case you have some folks that score high and low. Ordinal ranking just simply means which one do the selection committee think is the first ranked proposal, second, and third. The findings come back to you. There's plenty of time for public input and community input during this whole process. And then ultimately, when you make a selection, negotiations begin. That can be a relatively short negotiation, depending on the project, or they can extend 3 months, 6 months, up to a year. It really depends on how well the responses come in terms of adhering to what the RFP requests were. And at the final part of this is a development agreement. That's the legal document between the city and the private sector that spells out all of the expectations of both parties. We've negotiated many, many development agreements. Generally, I do have to tell you, development agreements tend to have amendments to them, because even though you negotiate a deal, all of a sudden, by the time a project gets construction drawings and they get out there and they start digging in the ground, and next thing you know, they find something and it wasn't in the development agreement. So we try to draft these kind of agreements where you're in a partnership. What you want to do is keep that partnership going and find a way to work through those unintended things that are found as you go through this process. We have never had an issue. One time in one project, there was a public-private partnership on that garage I showed you the picture of. And as soon as they went down and dug, even though we had done soil borings and tests and all kinds of analytics of the parcel, we found that there was a lift station that went 30 feet underground. You could literally walk 30 feet down. So who's going to remove it? What are we going to do with it, et cetera? These things happen. It's okay. What's important is that you have an agreement and you go through them and you walk through these things that pop up together. So it's okay to have issues come up. It's how you handle them is going to be the question. So the last thing I would leave you with is, again, I just give compliments to your staff, how they're progressing. And you're moving forward with all of your initiatives. We are here not only as your technical advisors, but really on call for anything you need, any questions, any part of this that isn't clear, or if you'd like to have follow-up calls, outside of these meetings, we're more than happy to do this. I would just really like to share with you from a statewide perspective, the city is at a really exciting time, and you have a lot going on. Some of you have been here for a while. I've seen you as you've made these decisions, and just think the city is really on a great track. And again, kudos to your staff. They really are doing, I think, a very good job. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions? Member Urban.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. What is the timeline on this, would you say?
We'll let your staff regard.
Okay.
So ideally, we'd like to be aggressive as possible. We first need to take in all the comments that we receive from a staff level. Pretty much every department provided some comments to us that we need to incorporate as part of the document. And then we also need to include if there are any comments from you as well. Our goal would be, hopefully by the end of this year, we can get something out. But we'd like to be as aggressive as possible.
Great. Thank you. And then my only other question is I think we discussed this at our last CRA meeting with this particular spot. I'm fine with it, but also we're sacrificing other parking spots that are already there to build parking spots. So I just wanted to know what the difference would be, how many parking spots would be added versus how many we'd be losing in that area too.
That's a very good question. I'll go back to what I had suggested before. What we would suggest you do from a strategy perspective, you want to try to maximize the amount of public spaces that you can get on that site, period. The maximum amount. There's a lot of ways to do that. Depending in that garage that I showed you, we took a part of the ground floor and we allowed valet. Well, valet, you can cram in a lot more spaces on the ground floor than if you just treat them as regular, 9 by 18 spaces. We want to make sure, though, that whatever private activity is above, be it residential or commercial, that has to get parked adequately as well. So I think it's like a balloon. What we're going to be doing is when we get these proposals in is put them on notice. We want to maximize the number of public spaces, but we also want to make sure that their project is parked, and we want to have shared parking opportunities. So we'll be working all three of those things simultaneously. Obviously, we don't want to trade one for one. If we had to, we would, because surface parking of one spot is very different than having a mixed-use project that's generating additional taxes and very different feel. But I think if we just take that approach of let's send the message of maximizing public spaces while not jeopardizing the private development, you'll end up in a good spot.
Thank you.
Member Matheny.
So I had a lot of comments on this. I guess mostly mine is the concern of, I understand of leaving it open, right? Like, we don't want to box everybody into some idea, and because somebody might have a great idea, right, that we're not thinking about. However, for me, I feel like not giving any guidelines, they're not going to get what I want, you know? What if they propose a 15-story parking garage? Do we want a 15-story parking garage? You know, I feel like there should be some goals or minimums in the contract, because it would just be like telling someone, go build me a house and make it a good one. Okay, well, how many bedrooms is that? How many bathrooms? I just feel like it's too vague. So I'm just going to read my comments that I emailed in, and, you know, you guys tell me how you feel about it. I definitely don't want to box people into, like, everyone gives us the exact same proposal, but I just feel like it's too open. For example, one of my comments was, do we give a goal of a minimum amount of public parking? Not tell them that's the maximum, but just say the minimum that has to be in here is X. So I'm just going to read my thing. I talked about public-private parking, which she covered. Do you want to mention that they don't have to use all the land? Do you want to give a goal about commercial and residential? I think if we gave a threshold goal, you might not get what, you know, if you don't give it, you might not get what you're asking for. Because we've talked about having bathrooms available on the first floor, because there's no bathrooms when we have events and things, make public bathrooms. Well, should we say that on here? Like, we want to have bathrooms available on the first floor? We're not saying where or how many or, you know, let's see, do you want to have a height restriction? I sat on the selection committee at the county for the parking garage that's currently there, and I remember in that selection committee, they said, this building will not be any taller than the building we're in. Well, it is, because they didn't get all the land that they thought. But, you know, that was one of their goals. Like, do you want a parking garage taller than this building? Or is this building the maximum? You know, I feel like we just need to give some particulars. I had in here about, you know, the successful proposer having come up with grants or funding opportunities. I know it's a public-private partnership. Let's see, it says in here that it's a brownfield, which I don't think I'd ever heard that before reading that. That was really it, just kind of like, I think if we don't give any guidelines or goals or hopes, and I even talked about theming the parking garage, like, do we want to theme it to our new city logo? To say, like, one floor is Sandhill Cranes, one floor is water, one floor is military, you know, like, how are we doing it? Are we having 2 elevators or 4 elevators? I don't know. I just think it's too wide open, and the likelihood of us getting something that meets what we have, like, in our mind is slim.
Shall I respond?
Yes.
Well, actually, I'd like to hear, if I could hear them first.
Okay.
To see what they think.
Member Fletcher.
So I do echo some of the same comments. I do think we should at least restrict it a little bit, or at least kind of give a vision of where we want it to go. I do, you know, echo the same concerns.
Yeah, I
that
mean,
you
I don't
do
want to
have.
box them in.
Not super tight,
Right,
but enough to give them a direction, because it's going to take a lot of work for them to go and come up with this stuff and bring it back to us. So that's the comments that I have.
Member Gilbert.
Feasible studies of how much parking is needed. As we grow, I know there's needed parking, and if we put residential on top, and I love the idea of putting businesses on the bottom and making it part of who we are when people come in and go, but is there a feasibility study that, you know, we know what the growth is? If we build a parking structure, here's my concern. In 2 years, it's going to be too small. You know, height restrictions. Okay, so you either go up or you go out. What's too big and what's too small? So I agree with you that we have to kind of tighten our guidelines and what we look at. And do you know anybody that does like feasibility studies? As you know, Florida grew at like 17%. Osceola County grew up 49%. We're in the heart of Osceola County. Are we going to have enough parking in 5 or 10 years, or we're going to have to add another structure? I know it's a crystal ball, but how do you, in your profession, see that? How do you see what's needed for the downtown area?
May I address that first? I just want to let the CRA board know that the city has a current funded project that is on our business plan that is going to look at the overall need for parking downtown. It's looking at the alleys, and it's looking also at some stormwater.
Okay.
So if the board wanted to delay this project at all, we will have that information eventually.
I don't want to delay anything, because we have so many projects, but it'd be nice to have that information to the people that are going out for bids. I think our council mentioned that, giving them more information to make accurate bids. Is that where you were going at?
I just think it's so open. You know, if somebody comes back, I know we had the 15-story building that was proposed previously downtown, and that was very polarizing. So I don't know how the council feels. If it was a 15-story parking garage, residential, commercial, some of you might feel that's not ideal, and some might love it. I don't know, but I think a little bit of guidelines would be helpful.
Member Loading.
I think restrictions are important, but I don't want to, I don't want, someone that's going to come in and propose a project, maybe they're going to propose a project. I don't want to restrict them. They may have ideas that we haven't even thought about. And as far as not going taller in this building, it's going to have to be taller in this building. I think that's a given.
Well, that was just an example.
Yeah, but I mean, you're not going to, it's going to be taller in this building. And it would be nice for this building to be the tallest, but that structure is going to be taller, I think, to make it feasible, especially if you're talking about putting apartments on top or condos or whatever they may be, and retail on the bottom. I think that's pretty much a given. And as far as the bathroom thing, I think that's a given too. I think we need to have public bathrooms, and I know the city would then be, have to keep them clean and do everything this and that, but that would probably under the Parks Department probably. But I think that's important for our downtown area to have public bathrooms. So
Personally, I think this is such a big project that it's far beyond our ability to say this is what it's going to be, what it can't be. I think as part of what we do, we bring along someone who can help us walk through this process. Because I certainly agree, we're going to have to make decisions about commercial, residential, bathroom height restrictions, but I think we don't have enough information to start setting those restrictions now, and I think that's part of a work process personally. And I just know when it comes to buildings, I know from a church perspective, being a pastor, you never build big enough. You always think you build according to your budget, and sometimes when you get there, you realize, wow, we sure did underestimate the vision that we could have had and we should have had. And I think we're going to struggle with a lot of that here with this project also. Councilmember Urban.
Isn't the I guess the advantage of a public-private partnership is that the market kind of dictates what is wanted or needed in the area, so that the market will kind of speak for itself on how big or that kind of thing?
Yes, you may go ahead.
Okay. Excellent. That's great. That I have to say, this kind of dialogue and input, it's healthy and it's perfect for this kind of a process. Let me see if I can frame some of it and help with some of it. First of all, there's three kinds of developments that take place. One, garden style, small, has very different requirements in terms of ADA, how a property is used, et cetera. The next up is going to be a mid-rise building. Okay, the mid-rise building is taller than this building, but it's not a high-rise. Mid-rise buildings are kind of a break point for all things expensive. As soon as you jump over that 8 stories and you start going to a high-rise, everything changes. Floor plate requirements, fire requirements, massive amounts of expensive things that have to happen. I cannot imagine on this site that you are going to get a response for a 15-story building. I don't think you're going to get a garden style either, because we're asking for public parking. I'm picturing your market. You're correct. The market will drive what's there, and we'll go back to the feasibility study in a second. But I think you're going to have more framework than you think you have, and I think you have said you want a mixed-use project. You want public parking in addition to what they're going to do. You want commercial on the ground floor, and you're giving them an opportunity for residential or commercial. That's a pretty tight box, actually. There's not a whole lot of room in there. Now, public bathrooms, yes. I mean, if you really are sure, positive, you want public bathrooms, I'm going to suggest we write it. But that's probably the only thing that isn't in there worded clearly enough that you have to create that box. Other than that, it's almost like bookends. Don't worry about the 15-story and don't worry about the 2-3-story. You're going to get a different kind of a project, or you're going to get nothing at all. If you get nothing at all, it means there is no market for it. Then let's go to the feasibility. We can do one. I don't suggest you do. You're going to spend money. The market is out there, and these private guys that build mixed-use projects, they already know. They're going to go do their own market study. They're the ones that have to get the lender to give them the money to build the building. That's your safety net. No lender is going to underwrite a $40, $50 million project unless they're darn sure that that thing is going to be successful. And they're going to want to have all that market data. So let the private guys worry about paying for that. Plus, they have a good idea. You know, you're not out in the middle of absolutely nowhere. You're you're still in an urban area enough that there's enough mixed-use development nearby that they know the cost of construction, because even though you're a little bit outside of a major metropolitan area, there's two influences on these kind of developments. What's it going to cost to build it? And I don't care if you put the steel in St. Cloud or you put it in Orlando, the cost of steel is the cost of steel. Then there's the revenue. That's the variable. The rents in St. Cloud are lower than the rents in metropolitan Orlando. So those are the kind of economics for this performa, and we ask them for a performa. We tell them to give us that performa. We know how to read them. We want to know what all those assumptions are. We check their assumptions. So when they tell us, well, we estimate concrete's this, steel's that, here's our hard costs, here's our soft costs, and here's our revenue, we're going to check those assumptions to make sure that they are within the realm of reality. So I do think you have more guidelines than maybe you fear you don't. I think you're okay with your feasibility study. And I think the other things about grants and asking for those things in brownfields, those are all things that can become part of this process. I wouldn't worry too much about writing them in there. We want to go for any grants that are available, and if it is designated a brownfield and we can apply for money, we would want to do that. And same with theming, you know, the garages, when you get a partner across the table from you, that's where you can discuss those things. And then your goals of residential versus commercial. That's the only thing I really would leave a little flexible, because I truly believe right now the market, the way that the interest rates are, the cost of construction, and what's happening, residential is just easier to finance. It would be a surprise to me if somebody would come in here and propose an office building on top of a garage. It could happen. We'll look at it if it does, but I don't think you have the density and the kind of headquarters and businesses to support that kind of activity. You'll get there. These things tend to go in order. Residential's always first. You create that residential density. Then comes some of your commercial activity, your retailers, your service uses, your grocery stores, et cetera, and then your offices start to come in behind them. And then it's a self-perpetuating thing. So I would suggest that you answer the bathroom question, though, because if you're really sure you want to have public bathrooms in there, we probably do want to write that in there, because that's a space thing that they'd have to kind of consider. Not that we couldn't do it later, but if you want them, we can say we may want them, and just at least put it on notice and put it in there.
It's always been discussed to have bathrooms in the parking garage, so.
I just had a thought. I have my light on.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you had forgot to turn it off.
Yeah, I did, but I turned it back on.
Go ahead.
So what about if you have space because there's going to be space in this parking deck for resident or retail, let's say, on the bottom, if we're talking about this, right? And what about if there was space? We have a police substation downtown. And what about if you make the police substation a restroom, which is right in the center of town, restrooms, and then just move their area over there?
I was thinking outside the box.
That substation's pretty small, isn't it? I don't know if it's big enough for.
I don't
bathrooms.
know how big it is either, but I've been in there, but I don't. It would be small bathrooms, wouldn't it? Yeah. Just a thought. It's right in the middle.
We do own that parking lot, though, so there is additional space to expand that building if the substation moved. But then we would lose additional parking.
Remember, Athena, your light's on?
No, I just said it. I mean, I guess I'll defer to your experience. I just think the likelihood of getting something that kind of is what everyone is envisioning is low. But the other thing I wanted to ask was, at some point, Veronica, it was discussed to have like some city space in this, like maybe offices or maybe conference rooms or maybe something. Is that still a desire?
I think when I've talked to staff, we also thought that in the future expansion of City Hall, whenever that happens down the road, there's the surface parking lot between fire and the city is not included in this, and that would be in that building whenever we built it. However, I think those are the things that would help staff vote higher for any proposals if there were those types of civic uses. You know, that's one of the things that I think staff's excited to see what we get.
Do we say anything about that?
No, I don't think there's anything like that in there.
No, and we'd have to watch out, because anything that we do that takes revenue down, that we increase revenue, or we take the revenue away, is only going to make it harder to do. So I usually suggest, if you can let the private sector be the private sector and build all things private, and we keep our ask to public parking and potentially a couple bathrooms, you're more likely to get there. If we try to chunk away different things in there, we're going to make it a little more difficult to do.
Member Wagner.
These are just proposals, so, we should at least get something in front of us to judge off of. I think we have an open air right now of like parking garage on our mind, and we're all looking at each other like, oh, what kind do you want? What kind do you want? I think we got a few of them put in front of us, and then we can build off of that. I definitely think whatever we do for commercial downstairs, create it to make it a destination, a long-term destination for people to come here for that. So that's what keeps business going, is it making it a destination.
Member Gilbert.
I agree with you and the mayor. Let's keep the private sector, not to put public city offices in there. We'll find somewhere else. For the restroom places, I just ask council, how many parking lots have you been into that have restrooms? If you go downtown Orlando, you go to the Amway, you go to Fort Lauderdale, I've never seen them. And maybe there are there, but we go to our destination to use the restroom, and again, are we adding money to the city cost by maintaining something that's a private partnership by utilizing there? I'm sorry to say this, or do we kiss it? You know, keep it simple, make it private, make our thing there, and then utilize whatever other resources we have for restrooms or city occupancy. That's my question, and again, we can get proposals all over the place, but sometimes we just need to narrow it in. What do we want? I think we want a parking structure, I think we want retail, and I think we want some residential. And I may be the only person asking that, but I don't want public restrooms. I don't want anything that becomes a burden to the city to maintain. Maybe
Ms.
I'm
Miller.
wrong.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to make sure the board knew the procurement process. So yes, we would be receiving proposals. However, the board can't be the selector of the proposals. You would receive the highest scored proposal. So there would be a committee of staff. The board could appoint a member if you would like to, but you would not receive 5 of them and have the opportunity to pick the best one. I wish it could work like that. And then
I nominate Kobe.
and then I just also wanted to explain some of the history on the restrooms. When we have events, we have porta potties, and it's just not the look that we want for our downtown or the experience when you have to go use a public porta potty. That is one of the things that I also was recently asking, like if our new addition was going to have the ability to have a public restroom as part of it. The building official explained to me it's not a good idea with the current setup. But then again, that was part of the plan for that new city hall, whenever it happens, annex in the future, that it could be a part of that. So we do definitely have a need for it with the events, because we want to continue having events. And, we don't want the public having to, use some of our historic buildings and using those restrooms, causing any issues during a large event.
Member Wagner.
Well, I think the public restrooms in general would help, especially with nightlife. If we don't have it in there, they're gonna use that building however they need to. So if we at least give it to them to keep it clean, and I think it's a necessity.
Member Urban.
Yeah, I think these are all great comments, and my only comment would be we can't let perfect be the enemy of good and what we want. I think we all have great ideas, and I wouldn't want to delay this process any more than it has to be. And if we're able to nominate a member of this board to the selection committee, I would love for Member Matheny to be on it. I think she has a lot of great ideas. That's all.
May I comment?
Yes.
I just wanted to also offer an alternative solution for the public restroom. So part of the 5-year strategic plan also includes the activation of Centennial Park. We are in the process now of working with the Parks Department to come up with a conceptual design. That is something that we could also ask to be included, is additional public restrooms as well. So it's just an alternative.
I personally think that would be a very wise.
Yeah. Yes.
Any other comment?
I'd rather see the restrooms in our public parks than in the parking deck. I just know we need them. Being downtown for 20-some years, we need them.
Right. So what else do you need from us at this point?
I don't believe anything. This was a very, very good dialogue. Appreciate all the input. We'll go back with your staff and try to wrap this up, and hopefully we can get this out very soon.
Okay, Antoinette.
Thank you so
Thank you.
very much.
Yes,
Great
thank you.
presentation. Great job.
Absolutely. And again, I'm always available anytime. Thank you for the invitation to come up and talk with you, and I'm sure we'll be back again.
Thank you. We look
you.
forward to working with you. Continuing our journey. The next item on our agenda is the St. Cloud Hotel Agreement.
Board,
City Manager?
we have wanted to see the St. Cloud Hotel restored for several years. It has a big place in most of our hearts for the historic preservation, and we've wanted to see it activated to continue to contribute to our downtown. We have $300,000 that was previously budgeted for the St. Cloud Hotel project in 2021. In 2022, the board did delegate authority to the city manager to negotiate and execute an agreement within 3 months for a grant or a loan. December 1st of 2022, the board rescinded the $300,000 from the fund allocation balance. And then at the April meeting, the board requested this special meeting this evening to review an agreement with the hotel, contingent on negotiated and agreed upon terms. Coming to an agreement within 1 month has been a large challenge. We've continued to work with Mr. Lika, who, due to a miscommunication on my part, is not here this evening. We would like to have an agreement that they're moving forward with the roof replacement this evening. I think the board knows the history that they have been working on that building for several years. They did have some delays due to COVID, supply issues, as well as some issues with the previous roofing contractor. They did start work recently. We do have Today, we approved the roof dry-in inspection. They did pass that inspection, and now they're ready to proceed with the metal installation. They do have the metal delivered. It is on site. We've gone back and forth with several different versions of the agreement. Big kudos to Mr. Manzares for helping us with several different versions. Mr. Lika also has had people helping him and an attorney also. We just had a very short time frame. So in your packets, you did receive an earlier version of the agreement. That's not the most recent version. The most recent version, I think, went out at 3 o'clock today, just to show you we've literally been going to the last minute on this. The biggest point of discussion is a performance guarantee. I believe I previously received direction from conversations with board members and in meetings that you want a performance guarantee. That is the item that we're struggling with. So I have a version of the agreement this evening that Mr. Manzares would go forward and explain to you. Mr. Lika did request, if possible, to push this to the June meeting. I will be honest, I will not be here for the June meeting. I would like to see an agreement for the building because they are moving forward with the roof. I don't want to see that stop because we don't have an agreement. If at a minimum, I would recommend that the board approve the latest version. And if Mr. Liga can't agree to the performance guarantee, if the board could give direction, is the performance guarantee required or not? And then we could potentially bring it back to the June meeting with any needed revisions if it wasn't, if we can't work through that tonight. So I guess the question is, would the board be willing to continue it? Because you did give direction, you wanted to see it tonight. Or would you like to go through the latest version of the agreement?
Councilman Urban.
Yes, I will also not be at the June meeting. I would like to be able to hopefully come to some type of resolution tonight. But I just would like to state that without a performance guarantee, I don't have any desire to come to an agreement. I think the city must have a performance guarantee if we're going to go into any agreement.
Mr. Manzares, can you share with us where you're at?
Certainly, and as Mrs. Miller pointed out, there's been several reiterations of this agreement going back to the first time that the CRA designated the previous city manager to try to negotiate it. And just for a little historical purpose, remember the original plan was for the CRA to essentially advance the dollars and actually pay contractors. It wasn't a reimbursement agreement. And that's why it was written and couched the way it was originally, and that's what the agreement put in. Since then, it has changed, and there's been some revisions to it. The latest version that's in your packet, and I think this is the key point, and I can go through all the changes if you want, but I think we do clearly need direction from this board as to whether what Mrs. Mill referred to as the performance guarantee is in place. The performance guarantee that we have in place is not solely tied to the completion of those items that you're seeing on the screen. It's tied to the completion of the hotel and the obtaining of a certificate of occupancy for the hotel. The original version of the agreement that we started out with had a performance guarantee in that said the CO will be issued within a certain period of time. We've revised that in this latest version where the performance guarantee would actually be a lien on the property and the amount and the reimbursement amount that would stay in place until the certificate of occupancy is issued. So essentially, the CRA would have the ability to recover those funds if the certificate of occupancy was not obtained. That's what we're talking about in terms of performance guarantee. So what we would need is, and I can go through the terms of the agreement. I think other than that one particular term, I think we could come to some agreement or tonight and get something approved, because I think that is the big that's the big agreement right now, the big point of discussion, as Mrs. Miller referred to it. So if I can go through it if you want, but I really would like to see what's the direction of the CRA. And as Mrs. Miller pointed, Mr. Leaka is not here tonight, so I'm not how you want to address that part.
Member Matheny.
I was trying to write it down when you were saying it, Dan, but I just want to make sure I heard it right. So in the version I read that was in the packet, and I had mentioned like, ooh, those timelines are short, you know, where it said they were going to have all these things done. There was like 4 timelines or something in there. So those remain.
Well, what we did with those, if I may, and I could get, those timelines originally came from them. Well, in some of the later reiterations, in fact, the one we received today, they had requested some additional flexibility on those timelines, and we've written that into the latest version of that there would be some flexibility to address those timelines. So, because we did think that they may be a little aggressive.
I thought they were aggressive, but so there is a timeline still remaining
Yes.
with those. And then what we're talking about now is instead of saying they have to do it by the CO, if they, basically we put a lien on them, and then that only goes away if they hit the deadline?
If they get their certificate, when they get their certificate of occupancy.
It's when?
Yes,
There's no deadline.
But there's no deadline?
there's no deadline.
But
right.
it's a reimbursement agreement, so the work that we would be paying for will be
We've already
done. So, you know, the performance guarantee is it's done. The building official will have inspected it. He will have signed off on it. Ms. Forbes will have received all the necessary documentation. She will have authorized payment. So the work would be done. It's just we wouldn't have gotten to a CO. You'll get the roof replaced, the dormer windows, and the plaster of the dormers. So the rest of the building, the rest of the facade will not be completed.
So I guess my concern is similar to Mr. Urban's, that just, I mean, we've been talking about this agreement for 2 years. I mean, I just don't have a level of confidence that things are going to be done in a timely manner. So if there was a way to like kind of split the plans, but maybe have the specific deadlines, and then it's like the lien goes on, and if they don't hit their CO, the lien doesn't come off. You know, like if they don't hit that date, then the lien doesn't come off. I don't know. We need something to kind of like get it going, because it's like we've been talking about this forever, and really the direction was don't come back unless you have an agreement that both parties have agreed to. That was what the conversation was at the last CRA meeting. So that's just my concern. I understand the work would be done, but what if then the work stops and the building gets abandoned and it gets torn down?
There's a provision in the agreement that would address if the work stopped.
Okay.
And then essentially the CRA could, for lack of a better expression, call the loan and seek reimbursement.
Okay.
Member Gilbert.
Thank you, Mayor. I love St. Cloud. This is a big point of St. Cloud. It's been delayed for numerous times for numerous reasons. I actually went up to the 4th floor today. Could barely get through the ladder because I'm kind of big, too many cheeseburgers. But the work inside I thought was exceptional, but I so much agree with Councilmember Matheny's that there needs to be timelines. We're general contractors now. We need to be able to tell our residents and our visitors and our other members that have places there that it'll be done at a certain time. We just can't freely give out money without some consequences. Now, the attorney said, well, we can recoup it. Well, you can't get water out of a rock. If we get the stuff that we pay for done and then it stops again for 16, 18, 20 months because he said, she said, this is a private ownership, but it's a centerpiece of our city. So with giving money away and granting money, which I'm all about, it's fine, but there has to be hard deadlines. There has to be things met. There has to be completion dates. As a general contractor for the trade show industry, we can't be 2 days late. The show has to open. We can't be 3 weeks late. We have to have deadlines, no matter what the costs are involved, no matter if the chandeliers are $50 or $5,000. That's not us. So if we're gonna grant money, we have to have deadlines and a schedule of events. Something will be done by this date. Something will be done by this date. I'd asked the owner's representative, you know, how long will it take? It's been 7 years to rehab this place. And they said, well, a year. I said, great, I'm in. They said, well, maybe 18 months. Well, is next year, is it gonna be 24 months? Is it gonna be 2026? I love the hotel down there, but I also love the other people that are there. And I looked out my window, and it's not a great sight, but I looked out that window on the 4th floor and see the city building. It's gorgeous. How long did it take us to put this building together? If we're going to lend, give, grant any money, there has to be some hard deadlines. And there has to be some default monies that if they don't do it, then we get it back, or we have partnerships or ownership. I don't think the city wants to be in the hotel business, but I do think we need to be pretty steadfast in our direction if we're going to do this. And also, I talked to the city manager, this may not be the only time they come to us. They may come to us again for additional dollars. Well, if they're not held accountable for their production, we can't be held accountable for our distributions. I just, that's my thought in this whole project. I love the place. I had a great walkthrough, spent 2 hours under the sun, but we have to have deadlines. And if we don't, then I'm a general contractor by trade. You tell me if I'm wrong, but I just don't think we can continue this road in 2016 and 2026. We're having the same conversation. Thank you.
Councilmember Urban.
If I could just add to that, not only do we need deadlines, I would like to see a financial plan and a plan on how this is going to get finished. I speak to residents every day that walk by this thing and see a building that's just been stagnant there for so long, and are just frustrated with seeing that. And I would like to see a plan for how not only the windows and the roof and the dormers are going to be finished, but the interior portion of the building, when this will be open for business. And about you coming back for more of it, this is not a piggy bank here. This is not a place just to come back for more money whenever it's needed. If they bought the building to rehab it and open it up as a hotel, they need to stick to that plan. And it's just we have to be financially responsible with the CRA funds as well. So just wanted to add that.
I think most of us are all in agreement that there has to be some reasonable deadlines, but with some flexibility. You know, getting supply, you know, you always have challenges, but there needs to be some specificity to what we're asking here and what they're expecting. And so I think that's part of where we're leaning on you to give us some wise
Well,
recommendations.
why don't we pass this out, and we can just try to go through some of this and deal with it. And as Mrs. Miller is doing that, the one issue that that I think was somewhat of an obstacle was determining what that end date would be for the certificate of occupancy. I think everybody acknowledged it's a big project, and it wasn't something that was going to get done in a year or 2 years. So we certainly agree that there should be some deadline in the agreement. There isn't one in there because we felt that was something that would have to be would be an obstacle, was an obstacle in the past. The original version we had, I think, had anticipate having a 4-year time frame to get a certificate of occupancy. So, but that was also at a time when pretty much all work on the project had stopped. So what's in front of you is a red line version of the agreement that was in your packet. And again, it's the same premise that the premise hasn't changed. There would be the items that were shown up on the screen related to the project. Those would be reimbursable items up to the amount that's in the agreement, which is, although there was a contingency put in there on the slide, the agreement we presented has a $241,500 cap for the work on those items. That's the reimbursable piece of it. A lot of the red line versions you see on the first page are related to the whereas clause. Those are actually wording that we put in there based on the owner of the hotel's request to sort of do a little better explanation of how they got to where they go, and it talks about some of the reasons for the delay. So those are those are just whereas provisions. If you go to page 2, there's some other changes on there. Some of them are minor changes to clear some up, but if you look on paragraph 2, on page 2, you can see the red line language where it says A, B, and C, that we added some language in there that would give the city manager the flexibility to extend those timeframes that were provided to us by the owner of the hotel. Those dates that are in there are actually the dates that they provided in a letter they sent to Mrs. Miller 3 weeks ago or so. So that would give the flexibility, and we'll circle back to some more flexibility that's later on in the agreement to do that. You'll see that we removed from this version of the agreement in paragraphs 4 and 5. These are provisions that were kind of carried over from the first agreement we had. The first agreement was again, as I said earlier, was an agreement where there would be essentially the CRA would be paying the contractors directly for the work. It wasn't a reimbursement style agreement. So those provisions we didn't feel were necessary. These are agreements that basically put the CRA in the position of reviewing and getting information from the owner's contractors. From a reimbursement perspective, since it's capped, and they're entering into their contract with their own, and they're paying them already, we didn't feel like that the CRA needed to be involved in the relationship between the owner of the building and their contractors. If you flip over to let me just make sure, I want to make sure I didn't miss it. Okay, let me back up to paragraph 3 is the part of on page 2. That's the part of the agreement that requires a security agreement and a promissory note. The security agreement is an exhibit to this agreement, and I'll talk about that in a second, but that's the part where basically depending on how much money is paid by the CRA, reimbursed, that would be the amount of the lien or the promissory note or the security that would be held on the property in the name of the Community Redevelopment Agency. That's been in the agreement from the beginning, and we're recommending that stay in the agreement. If you circle back over to page 3, under number 5, there is you can see some additional redlining there that, again, adds some additional flexibility to the things as Councilwoman Matheny was pointing out. Essentially, this provides another 45 days. What this provision does is basically says that if they don't meet this criteria, that they will waive their right to the reimbursement. But what this does is it gives them some extra time in the event that they don't make those deadlines that were up in the earlier part of the agreement. So basically, they would get whatever the original date was. That date could be extended by the city manager, and then they would get another 45 days on top of that to meet the deadlines for those particular projects before they would deem to have waived their right to reimburse. There's the language on page 4 that you see stricken out. That was actually, I discovered, was a duplication. It's actually the similar language that's in paragraph 9 below, so that's why that was removed. If you go back to onto page 5 now, moving on to page 5. One of the comments that we received back was there was concern about the default in the agreement. So we added an opportunity to cure, which is pretty standard in these kind of agreements. So if they breached any terms of this agreement, the CRA would have to give them notice, and then they'd have a 30-day period to cure that default, or before the agreement would be terminated. I think that might be the last one. So if you flip to the last page of what we just handed out, that is a single paragraph from the reimbursement, the mortgage and security agreement that would be is an exhibit to this. And the comment got back to my office that they were concerned that if we required the security agreement and the promissory note, that might impact their ability to obtain a construction loan or renovation loan on the project, that they might have to get some additional financing needed to complete the project. So what this is that's a pretty standard language in agreements like this. It's essentially a subordination agreement, which means the CRA would agree to basically subordinate its finance and its lien interests to a construction loan or a renovation loan that might be taken out on the building. So that would not that language would give them the ability to borrow money to complete the project if they need to do that, and the CRA would still have its right to recover the money. So the general premise behind the agreement, as we've talked about, is they would get the reimbursement if they did they would get the total reimbursement if they do all three of the phases we talked about. They submitted timely reimbursement. It was signed off on by the city, and they would get the cash reimbursement. They would be entitled to, they wouldn't have to repay it until such time or that they didn't get a CO or they breached the agreement. There is a provision in the agreement that says they have to continue to maintain construction, and that and that if they stop construction basically for a period of 90 days, and then, or there's no activity, then that would be termed a breach of the agreement. So they'd have to continue to do the construction and keep the permits active and continue to do work. And if there's a break for 90 days, then that would be considered a default under the agreement, which would enable the CRA to recover any of the funds that have been paid to date, or they would deem to, if they hadn't been paid to date, then they would waive their right to receive any of that reimbursement. So we think it's about as fair as we can do it. The only thing that we haven't included in there is a deadline for the obtaining of the certificate of occupancy. So if that is something that the CRA would like to see included in the agreement, we can certainly add that. We would appreciate any direction on what the board thinks the appropriate date would be.
Councilmember Matheny.
I have a different question for
Mayor,
you,
please.
Mr. Manzares. On the table the internet had pulled up, there was like 58,500 in contingency.
Yeah.
Does this say anything about how that contingency is?
Nope.
No, that's just the project current now.
Okay,
the
so we're
city's
not
project.
saying that there's contingency for them to.
Correct.
No,
Okay.
that's what, I'm sorry, that's what I meant by that was.
Okay, contingency to me is like, oh, if their numbers come in
No.
higher, they have an opportunity to come back. So
Well,
that's not on
remember,
the table.
and, they always have an opportunity to come back, but it would be up to the board at the time to decide whether they wanted to do anything.
Well, no, I mean, it seemed
No,
to me
no.
that it was in this
No,
agreement.
it's not. No.
Okay.
Councilmember Gilbert.
Yeah, I'm new here, along with Councilmember Fletcher, but wasn't the agreement that we were going to pay for the roof, and it got done, and it got approved by engineers, and the owners decided it wasn't up to snuff, and they got other people involved, and it became approved and unapproved. So they didn't get the grant money, but it stalled the project for 8 or 10 months in the litigation system, which, again, I understand litigation. But now we're going back and say, well, okay, we're gonna throw some money at the pot again, and you choose, the roofers, you choose this, and you choose this, and what happens if they get into it again, where we're out of the picture, they choose the contractors, but we suffer the consequences if they don't approve, which was approved by our engineers, and I'm not an engineer, so I don't know if it's a great roof or a bad roof or whatever, I'm just not. The owner said it wasn't up to snuff, so he wasn't paying for it. So the city gets to sit on a building for 9 months while they litigate. Why are we involved with that process? We're allowing them to choose the contractor, we're allowing them the money, but then when they get in a disagreement, we suffer because nothing gets done. I don't know how to do it as a city government, as a private business person. I'd fire the contractor, get a new one, and get it going. But I don't know how it works with the government. But why are we suffering 9 months where nothing was done because the roof wasn't done right by the contractor that they chose, And it did get approved, but it wasn't to their specifications because they wanted the roof to last forever. And I understand that. I love the owner's passion. Very passionate person. But why are we as a city getting involved with contractual agreements and disagreements and litigation?
Well, that's part of we took that out. Originally, in the original version, we were involved with that because the original version had the city actually, the CRA paying the contractor directly.
Right.
So that was one of the things that has been removed from this latest version because that's not the general scheme here. The scheme here is that they will actually pay the contractor. They will get approval for each segment of the project. The roof is probably the one that would have the most definite removal because, as Mrs. Miller pointed out, they've got their dry-in, they're moving forward with it. It'll go through final inspections, and Bob and his staff will sign off on and say it's good to go. We know that's complete, that segment of it, and then they'll submit their reimbursement and they'll get it. So,
Well, thank you. The issue I have was the roof was done, it was approved, and then it wasn't up to spec by the owner, and the project sat for 9 or 12 months through litigation. I don't want our city to be involved with that litigation. So I guess you said it's written out.
yeah, we've specifically put it that the city or the CRA will not be involved in any of that litigation. And typically we're not. The only thing that concerns the reason why some of those terms were put in there in the initial version was because essentially the CRA was being asked to be the financer for the part of the project. And since we're otherwise the CRA wouldn't, or the city wouldn't have any involvement in this project. It'd be like every other private construction project in the city where the only involvement by the city is that they're issuing the permits and they're doing the inspections. If the work isn't done to the standards of the contract, that's between the owner of the property and the developer and the contractor. If there's warranty issues, that's between the owner of the contractor and the contractor. The city doesn't get involved in that, and we wanted to work very hard to make sure we weren't getting involved with that anymore in the future.
Well, thank
My
you.
understanding is that's over also.
Well,
Yeah, litigation.
again, you don't want anything to repeat itself. We said, okay, if we give them money, then they choose the contractor, they choose who, and if it isn't done to their standards, approved by our standards, then they go back to litigate, and guess who sits empty is a beautiful hotel that's a centerpiece of our city. Again, I love the hotel, I love the concept, the passion of the owner is great, but as a city, for our citizens, let's protect us and say, and we need true deadlines. We need, this has to be done by this time, this has to be done by this time, and this has, if not, as I said before, take the cookie jar away.
Isn't that what this?
Yes,
isn't
with
that
the-
what you
with the-
have put before us that
with the
you're
ex-
seeking to accomplish with this contract?
And as I said earlier, there is not a deadline for the certificate of occupancy for the entire building. So if you want, that's something that could be easily put in. We just, we would leave that up to the discretion of this board.
Councilmember Fletcher.
So, what concerns me about this is the financial capabilities of the owner to be able to complete the project. Here we are again, and still haven't come up with an agreement with the owner. And I know he's not here tonight because of whatever circumstance, but I'm sure there's audio capabilities for him to chime in to have a conversation with us. And if we come to an agreement of what we want, how do we know he's even going to accept it? With the CRA, we're looking at giving, $200,000 to somebody as a reimbursement for work that they've done on a private investment. And we have a checklist of saying, do this, 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 and this, and you get the money. I don't understand why it's so difficult to negotiate this. And that's where I'm at.
Mr. Manzarek.
If I can just comment on that, I think where this is, frankly, where this has kind of gotten off the rails is that it really wasn't a negotiation. It never was intended to be a negotiation. There's an ask from a private property owner to use funds that are available to do this, but it's not really an agreement between the CRA and the private property owner. It's not an agreement in the traditional sense that the CRA is going to provide a certain amount of funding, and then the CRA is going to get that funding back plus interest like a bank would. So it's really not that, and I agree completely with Mr. Fletcher's comment that I think the CRA board needs to essentially say, this is how we're willing to accept it, and if you want the reimbursement, then fine. If you don't, then the project moves on without us, like any other private development project goes on in the city.
Councilman Urban?
Yeah, I echo Councilmember Fletcher's comments. The other thing is too, that without a performance guarantee, that's just a non-negotiable point for me. I don't see why that would be an issue. There has to be some way that the city protects itself with a performance guarantee. And as far as the CO deadline, I would say 18 months max from the time of this agreement. There would have to be a hard CO deadline to make sure that this project moves forward and gets completed.
One question, Mr. Mayor, are they going to come
Yes.
back? Is this the only time they're asking, or is it going to be asked again upon CRA money or any different monies for us to fund? Because if we don't, then they stop again, and then we just lost 300 grand or 241 grand.
Well, that's the contingency that you're writing into this contract,
Right.
is that we go back and you place the lien again.
Right. The way it is, the CRA would have the remedy of being able to go back and essentially claw back the money if they didn't meet the deadline.
Bob, in your opinion and from your professional experience, is 18 months a reasonable amount of time to finish what you know needs to be done at that building? It's not like a fast timeline for me with all that needs to be done.
I think that would be a very aggressive timeline with what is remaining to be done to the building. I think 24, possibly even 36 months would be reasonable to get a complete, properly finished product there. I would hesitate to rush them at this point because of what they've got invested in the structure. To encourage them to do less than what they had originally intended to do, if that makes sense. You know, that building has the potential to really, really be something, as you said, a centerpiece for the city, if it's done correctly. And I don't know that it would be fair to put an 18-month timeline on a contractor to do the amount of work that needs to be done. And I know everybody's heard it, but there are still supply chain problems in getting material. Plus, there's a tremendous amount of work yet to be done in that building. I mean, they've got it structurally sound. They've got most of the interior framing done, but there still leaves the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing work, and the finishes take a long time to get done, especially to the level of the finishes that they have proposed in the building.
Ms. Miller?
Bob, how long do you think it should take them to finish the facade? I think the facade is everybody's biggest concern because that's what the citizens see.
I think the facade could be finished in 18 months.
Thank you.
But that's not a CO.
No, but perhaps the board would consider that as a guarantee.
Okay? It's a possibility. Councilman Gilbert?
So, thank you for your expertise. So we're looking at, from the conception of this building being bought in 2016 to be complete in 2026, which is a 10-year project.
There have been a lot of ownership changes and things along the way. The current permit is a 2019 permit.
Okay. Thank you for the answer. I've seen high rises go up in 4 or 5 years, but
Yes, sir, I understand.
I understand you too. And again, nothing against it. I think it was a great idea. We get that facade done. We get these outside folks to see the facade. They can spend years inside. But seeing scaffolding outside, seeing that stuff outside, I think that's a great idea. We put permits on getting the outside look, and they can work inside all they want. I don't think it's going to benefit us one way or another if all their 38 rooms are full or empty, or if they got corporate transit, or if they have vacationers, or if they have ballroom, or they have proms. But I think if we put some pressure on the outside of the building to be looked at a certain point with your expertise, I think that's a great idea, Ms. Miller.
Ms. Miller, your light's on, you have.
No, thank you, sorry.
Mr. Urban?
I do like that idea as well, but I would just note that even though the facade will be finished, it's still going to be an active construction site until it has its CO. Is that correct?
That is correct, but they still have to pass an inspection every 6 months to keep the permit active. If they don't, then the permit expires, and there are remedies that we can pursue after that.
Okay.
Councilman Merman, if they go in the back end of the house, it's not as bad as working in the front of the house.
Oh, I absolutely agree with you,
If
but
that makes sense.
I think that that's a great start, and maybe an 18-month deadline for the facade and a 36-month for the final CO, I think would be a reasonable timeline.
And would there be flexibility if you've got supply issues that come up? Surely there's got to be flexibility. You'd write into a contract.
We certainly could. You could write flexibility.
And having the caring, understanding city manager that we have, I'm sure she would be very understanding, as we have certainly been thus far. I like that suggestion, 18-month for the facade and 36 months for the completion of the building. Let's move. Because there's a lot of work that has to be done on that building. Could never be, I don't think it could be done in 18 months. Councilman Matheny.
I like that suggestion too. Is it possible to put it in the contract, write it up, button it, put a bow tie on it, give it to them? If they don't sign it, we're done? Don't come back?
With the direction from this board, yes.
That would be, if we're gonna, that would be my desire. I think that's fair. It's a fair solution. Put it in there, and if the owner doesn't want to sign it, then we're done talking about it. That's my personal.
Did I make a motion? Can I make a motion?
I got a question.
It's your meeting, sir.
Okay, I have a question. I'm sorry.
So
Mr.
if we're putting an 18-month deadline on it, can't we just say that we're not giving the disbursement of the grant money for 18 months? And then we know it's done?
That makes it really complicated.
The project's for the outside, so we'd have to be able to fund them for that, right?
All of this is outside stuff.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So
Well, yes, to answer your question, yes, you could do that. I don't know if this is specifically the case, but my experience with these types of projects is the reimbursement dollar sometimes plays an important role in the financing related to the other project. It's often used as what's kind of referred to as a credit enhancement towards the project. And it wouldn't surprise me if that's typically what happens in these things. So I think sticking with the schedule is probably a better a better plan just to make sure it gets done. And I do think you have to have the certificate of occupancy date and issue there. You can't just go on the facade. Because the important thing to remember, this isn't just providing a project some money to get done. You're using CRA funds, which are designed to increase the value of the property in the CRA. So the value of the property truly increases when the CO is issued, not when the facade is done or when the project's under construction. So you have to stay within your authority to use these funds. And that's why we've always tied everything to getting the project done, because that's what is consistent with the CRA purposes of the funds being used.
Well, then can we make a motion that the facade be, you write us up a contract for 18 months for the facade, and that the CO be completed within 36 months?
Yeah, so what we would, yes, and we certainly can do that. So what we would clarify that would be essentially the agreement that we went through just a little while ago, plus 18 months for the facade milestone and 36 months for the certificate of occupancy from the effective date. And then with a provision that would allow for the city manager to provide some flexibility for either of those deadlines.
Yes.
I'm good with that, but I would like it to be if the mayor would add it, like, if the owner doesn't sign this, like, I don't want to talk about it anymore.
Yeah, don't come back to, yeah, we don't want to continue to go down this path. This is the final offer, the final.
Depends on what his offer is. I hate to just close the door or something,
You want to say that?
because we want to wash our hands of it. I think we're certainly frustrated.
Mr. Lika has asked for 40 months for the CO. He's watching right now.
40 months? 4 more months? I'd be willing to amend it to that, if he's watching. And I hope you're listening, Mr. Lika. We need to move forward, man.
I'll second your motion.
Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Well, you don't have to do a roll call, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, say no.
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 So we got,
And the majority carries. Do I need to identify who
we
voted?
had 2 against? Right, Mr. Urban, you were opposed?
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, we'll receive any public comment. Would anyone in the audience like to speak to this item or any item not on the agenda? If not, our next information has our our city manager has a light on.
Before you adjourn the meeting, I wanted to take the opportunity first. Ms. Forbes has a new employee who joined us this evening. I was hoping that she might introduce him to the board.
Thank you. Sorry. So yes, we have a new staff member. We are completely staffed in economic development. I'm very excited about that. So our CRA specialist, his official name is Hendrik Van Leesen, but he goes by Kareem. He is out of South Florida. He has decades of experience in both redevelopment on the public and private side. I believe he also has a real estate broker's license, if I'm not mistaken, and he speaks 3 languages, English, Spanish, and Dutch. So we are very excited to have him on staff.
Welcome. It is a joy to have you here. Thank you so much. We look forward to.
Thank you, thank you. I'm glad you came to a great meeting, so they all rolled this way.
And Mayor, I have,
Mr. Manzares.
Oh,
that was it.
was it my item?
It was your item. I just wanted to make sure it happened.
So, as you know, as well, everybody probably, except Mr. Wagner probably knows, all of you have to participate in 4 hours of ethics training. The city council has to do it, obviously, but two or 3 years ago, the legislature made CRA board members have to do that. So we were looking at doing it. I'm going to do a lot. We'll do a live presentation to the group so that you can complete that. You have to have it done by July 1st. So there is at next week's council meeting. We understand it's an extremely light agenda. Again, it's 4 hours. So we thought that we would schedule 2 hours of it to occur after the conclusion of that agenda next Thursday. Now, Mr. Loading, Mr. Wagner, you do not have to come to the council meeting. We'll record it, and so you can be bored at home watching me speak. But unfortunately, as those who've been through it before know, the legislature makes you do it every year, but the material doesn't change every year. So it's very much the same material over and over again, but you have to do it. All 70 of you have to do it. So with that, we'll do the first part of it, 2 hours. We'll probably do public records and sunshine law, and then we'll find another time to do the balance of it when we can do that. So.
Good.
All right. Thank you.
Any other comment from anyone on the board here? If not, I remind you that the next CR meeting is scheduled for Thursday, June the 1st, 2023. With that, there's no other items on our agenda. Thank God, we're done.
I was just going to welcome Adam.
Thank you.
What a first meeting.